Veronica Harrington had never faced a consequence in her life. Not when she crashed her first sports car at 16. Not when she got caught shoplifting designer sunglasses for fun with her friends. And definitely not when she skipped an entire semester of her Ivy League classes that Daddy's donations had secured for her. So on that warm Tuesday morning, as she zoomed through a school zone at nearly twice the speed limit, her long blonde hair whipping in the convertible's breeze, the thought of getting pulled over didn't even cross her mind. The flashing lights in her rearview mirror seemed almost comical at first. "Do you know how fast you were going, miss?" The officer's face was stern as he peered down at her through mirrored sunglasses. Veronica sighed dramatically and lowered her designer shades. "Fast enough to make good time, slow enough to look good doing it," she replied with a wink. When the officer didn't smile, she reached for her purse. "Look, can we just handle this the easy way? My father's golf buddies with the police commissioner." The name-dropping didn't work this time, maybe because this particular school zone had been the site of a tragic accident just months earlier, maybe because Veronica's attitude pushed the officer's patience too far, or maybe because for once she'd encountered someone who believed in actual justice. 20 minutes later, she sat in her car, staring in disbelief at the ticket in her manicured hands. Not just a speeding ticket, but a reckless driving citation that required a court appearance. Actual court. With judges and lawyers and all those common people. "Daddy will fix this," she muttered, tossing the ticket into her glove compartment, before speeding off again, though slightly slower this time. Back, at her luxury downtown apartment, a graduation present she'd received. Despite barely passing, Veronica poured herself a mimosa and called her father. "Daddy, it's me. I need a favor." She explained the situation with dramatic embellishments, making it sound like the police officer had targeted her unfairly. Richard Harrington, CEO of Harrington Real Estate Development, was in the middle of an important meeting but had taken his daughter's call anyway. "Veronica, I'm tied up with the Tokyo investors all week. Just have Clayton handle it." Clayton was the family's longtime attorney, practically on retainer for Veronica's mishaps. "But Daddy, no buts. I've got $1 billion deal on the line. Handle it like an adult for once." The call ended before she could protest further. Veronica tossed her phone onto her white leather sofa and flopped down dramatically beside it. Like an adult, she mimicked in a whiny voice. 23 years old, and her father still treated her like a child. Well, except when it came to her trust fund allowance, which was frustratingly limited until she turned 25. The court date arrived faster than Veronica expected. She'd nearly forgotten about it until Clayton called the night before. "Be at the courthouse by 9 a.m. Dress conservatively. Speak only when spoken to. And for heaven's sake, be respectful," the attorney instructed. Yeah, I know how to act," Veronica replied, rolling her eyes as she scrolled through social media on her other phone. "What's the worst that could happen, a fine? Daddy can cover it." "You'd be surprised what can happen when you disrespect a judge," Clayton warned. "Judge Washington is fair but has no patience for entitled attitudes." "Judge who?" But Clayton had already hung up. The next morning, Veronica sauntered into the courthouse 20 minutes late, wearing a designer outfit that was fashionable, but hardly the conservative look her lawyer had suggested. Her 6-inch heels clicked loudly on the marble floor as she navigated the building, iced coffee in hand. Oversized sunglasses still on despite being indoors. The courtroom was already in session when she pushed through the doors. All heads turned to look at the latecomer. Clayton's expression was one of barely contained horror as he watched his client strut down the center aisle like it was a fashion runway. "Ms. Harrington, I presume?" The deep voice came from the bench where Judge Washington sat, looking distinctly unimpressed. He was a man in his 50s with close-cropped gray hair and dark skin that contrasted with his black robes. His eyes, sharp and perceptive, followed Veronica's casual approach. "That's me," she replied with a little wave. As if greeting an acquaintance at brunch rather than a federal judge, she tried to bring her coffee with her to the defendant's table. But a court officer stepped forward. "No food or beverages in the courtroom," he said firmly. Veronica looked genuinely confused, as if the rule couldn't possibly apply to her. "But it's a $20 cold brew," she protested. Judge Washington's expression remained impassive. "Perhaps you can consider it your first fine of the day, Ms. Harrington. Please dispose of the beverage outside and return promptly." Whispers and a few muffled laughs rippled through the courtroom. Veronica's cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she was forced to walk back out, deposit her precious coffee in a trash can, and return under the watchful eyes of everyone present. "Now that we can proceed," Judge Washington said once she was seated beside her attorney, "you are charged with reckless driving in a school zone, endangering the welfare of children."
How do you plead?
Clayton started to stand, but Veronica pulled him back down. "Not guilty, obviously," she stated loudly. "It was barely over the limit and there weren't even any kids around." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Counsel, please advise your client on proper courtroom procedure." Clayton leaned over and whispered urgently in Veronica's ear. She huffed but allowed him to stand and formally enter a plea. As the proceedings continued, Veronica's attention wandered. She pulled out her phone and began texting her friends about the totally lame situation she was in. A court officer noticed and approached quietly. "Ma'am, cell phones must be turned off in the courtroom," he whispered. Veronica looked up with annoyance. "I'm just letting my friends know I'll be late for lunch," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. Judge Washington stopped mid-sentence in his review of the charges. The courtroom fell silent. "Ms. Harrington," he said calmly, "perhaps I haven't made myself clear. This is a court of law, not a social club. Please surrender your phone to the bailiff for the remainder of these proceedings." "You can't take my phone," Veronica protested. "Do you have any idea who my father is?" Clayton closed his eyes in mortification. "I'm afraid your father isn't relevant to these proceedings," Judge Washington replied evenly. "Your behavior, however, is becoming increasingly so." Reluctantly, Veronica handed over her phone, but not without an exaggerated eye roll that everyone in the courtroom could see. She then slouched in her chair, arms crossed over her chest like a sulking teenager. As the officer who had ticketed her gave testimony about the incident, describing how Veronica had endangered children by speeding through a school zone recently designated as high risk after a previous accident, she began filing her nails, the soft scratching sound just audible in the quiet courtroom. Judge Washington paused the proceedings again. "Ms. Harrington, are you finding these proceedings boring?" "Kind of, yeah," she replied without looking up. "No offense, but I have places to be." A collective intake of breath swept through the courtroom. Even defendants with far more serious charges knew better than to speak to a judge this way. "I see," said Judge Washington, his voice still remarkably calm. "And where exactly do you need to be that's more important than addressing charges that could result in the suspension of your driver's license and potentially jail time?" That got Veronica's attention. "Jail?" She laughed nervously. "Come on, that's a bit dramatic, don't you think? People speed all the time. Not all people endanger children in an area where a child was struck and seriously injured just 3 months ago," the judge replied. "Not all people then disrespect the court that's trying their case." For the first time, Veronica seemed to realize she might be in actual trouble. She straightened slightly in her seat and stopped filing her nails. But old habits die hard and entitlement ran deep in her veins. "Look," she said, leaning forward with what she thought was a charming smile, "can't we just figure out what the fine is so I can pay it and go? My father's company makes donations to the city all the time. I'm sure we could arrange something special for whatever cause you care about." Her eyes flicked meaningfully around the courtroom, taking in the judge's race in a way that made her implication clear. The gallery went deadly silent. Clayton looked as though he might faint. Even the court reporter's fingers froze over her stenotype. Judge Washington's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "Ms. Harrington, are you attempting to bribe this court?" "Bribe? No." Veronica backpedaled quickly. "I'm just saying my family is generous. We help communities all the time." She emphasized the word communities in a way that made several people in the gallery shift uncomfortably. "I think we need a brief recess," Judge Washington announced, rising from the bench. "Ms. Harrington, I suggest you use this time to confer with your counsel about appropriate courtroom behavior and the serious nature of the charges against you. We will reconvene in 15 minutes. As the judge exited, conversation exploded in the courtroom. Clayton grabbed Veronica's arm and practically dragged her to a private consultation room. "What are you doing?" he hissed once the door closed behind them. "Are you trying to go to jail?" Veronica shrugged off his hand. "Don't be so dramatic. He can't do anything to me." Clayton stared at her in disbelief. "He absolutely can. And if you continue this behavior, he absolutely will." The 15-minute recess felt like an eternity to Clayton, who paced the small consultation room while Veronica examined her manicure. "You need to apologize when we go back in there," he insisted, loosening his tie as stress beads of sweat formed on his forehead. Judge Washington is one of the most respected judges in this district. He worked his way up from nothing, put himself through law school while raising his siblings after his parents died, and has a reputation for fairness that's unmatched. Veronica glanced up from her nails. "So I'm supposed to be impressed because he has a sob story? Lots of people have tough lives. My yoga instructor grew up in a trailer park, and you don't see her wearing a robe and acting all high and mighty." Clayton stopped pacing and stared at her in disbelief. "This isn't about impressions, Veronica. This is about you potentially going to jail because you can't show basic human respect to a judge who holds your fate in his hands." "Jail?" Veronica scoffed. "For speeding? Don't be ridiculous." "Not for speeding," Clayton said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "For contempt of court. For the racist implications in what you just said out there. For attempting to bribe a federal judge. Take your pick." For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across Veronica's face. "I wasn't being racist," she protested, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "And it wasn't a bribe. Daddy makes donations all the time to get what he wants." Clayton slumped into a chair across from her. "That's called influence peddling, and it's not something you brag about in a courtroom." He checked his watch. "We have 5 minutes. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to sit up straight, look respectful, speak only when spoken to, and if the judge gives you a chance to apologize, you take it. Got it?" Veronica rolled her eyes but nodded reluctantly. When they returned to the courtroom, a strange hush fell over the gallery. Veronica noticed people looking at her with expressions ranging from disgust to fascination. It made her uncomfortable to be seen as the villain, rather than the admired center of attention she was accustomed to being. Judge Washington re-entered, and everyone rose. As they sat back down, the judge fixed his gaze directly on Veronica. "Ms. Harrington, before we continue with these proceedings, I want to address your behavior during the first half of this hearing. In my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely encountered such blatant disrespect for the court." Veronica shifted in her seat, for once finding herself without a quick retort. "You arrived late, brought prohibited items into my courtroom, used a cell phone during proceedings, engaged in distracting behavior, spoke out of turn, and made comments that could be interpreted as attempting to improperly influence this court." The judge leaned forward slightly. "Would you care to explain yourself?" Clayton nudged Veronica gently, and she stood, smoothing her designer skirt with trembling hands. She cleared her throat, unused to feeling genuinely nervous. "I didn't mean to be disrespectful." A few scoffs could be heard from the gallery. "Continue," Judge Washington said, his expression unreadable. "It's just that I'm not used to this." She gestured vaguely around the courtroom. "I've never been in trouble before." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Never been caught, perhaps. But your driving record shows 3 previous speeding incidents that were handled without court appearances." He flipped through some papers. "Interesting how those tickets disappeared from the system." Veronica's cheeks flushed. Her father's connections had made those problems vanish so efficiently that she'd almost forgotten about them herself. "As for your comment about donations," Judge Washington continued, "let me be clear, justice in my courtroom cannot be bought. Not by your father, not by anyone. And the implication that I, as a black judge, might be susceptible to such influence is both offensive and potentially actionable." A murmur ran through the courtroom. "I wasn't," Veronica began, but the judge raised his hand. "Choose your next words very carefully. Ms. Harrington?" She swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how many eyes were on her. This wasn't like her social media accounts where she controlled the narrative. For once in her life, Veronica Harrington had no power in the room. "I apologize, Your Honor," she said quietly, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "My behavior was inappropriate." Judge Washington studied her for a long moment, as if weighing the sincerity of her apology. "Very well. Let's proceed with the case." What followed was a methodical dismantling of Veronica's defense. The prosecution presented evidence from the police cruiser's dashboard camera, showing her car zipping through the school zone at nearly twice the speed limit. They called the crossing guard who had witnessed the incident and had to pull a child back from the crosswalk as Veronica's convertible roared. Past worst of all was the testimony from a mother whose son had been seriously injured. In that same school zone just months earlier, the woman didn't directly address Veronica, but her quiet description of her 8-year-old's injuries and ongoing physical therapy made several jurors dab at their eyes. Veronica found herself unable to look at the woman, instead staring at her own manicured hands folded in her lap. When it was the defense's turn, Clayton did his best, arguing that Veronica had been running late for an important appointment and had misjudged her speed. He emphasized her clean criminal record and suggested community service as an appropriate penalty. Would the defendant like to make a statement before the court considers sentencing? Judge Washington asked when both sides had presented their cases. Clayton gave Veronica a warning look as she stood. She faltered, unused to feeling genuinely remorseful. I didn't realize how dangerous my driving was. I never meant to put anyone at risk, especially children. For once, her words weren't calculated or manipulative. The mother's testimony had affected her more than she cared to admit. Judge Washington nodded slightly. The court will take a brief recess to consider sentencing. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. As the judge left the bench, Veronica turned to Clayton. How bad is it going to be? She whispered. Hard to say, he replied, gathering his papers. You didn't do yourself any favors with your behavior, but your apology seemed sincere. Judge Washington is tough but fair. What's the worst that could happen? She asked, genuine worry creeping into her voice. Given the reckless endangerment aspect and your conduct in court, you could be looking at a suspended license, a substantial fine, and potentially some jail time. Jail? Veronica's eyes widened in horror. I can't go to jail. Do you know what that would do to my social media brand? My followers expect weekly updates from yacht parties and fashion shows, not prison jumpsuits and metal toilets. Clayton stared at her, wondering if she would ever understand the real-world consequences of her actions beyond how they affected her image. The 30-minute recess dragged on for nearly an hour. By the time they were called back into the courtroom, Veronica had bitten off most of her expensive manicure. The gravity of the situation had finally penetrated her bubble of privilege. Judge Washington returned to the bench, his expression solemn as he shuffled some papers before him. Ms. Harrington, please rise for sentencing. Veronica stood on shaky legs, fighting the urge to run from the courtroom. This court takes the safety of our community very seriously, particularly the safety of children. The school zone where you were speeding has been designated as high risk following a serious accident. The posted speed limits aren't suggestions. They're laws designed to protect our most vulnerable citizens. He paused, looking directly at Veronica. I've also considered your behavior in this courtroom, which demonstrated a troubling lack of respect for our legal system and, frankly, for the value of others' lives and experiences. Veronica's heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. However, the judge continued, I've also taken note of what appeared to be a genuine moment of remorse during these proceedings. It is the opinion of this court that what you need isn't punishment for punishment's sake, but rather an opportunity to develop empathy and understanding for those whose lives are different from your own. Confused murmurs rippled through the courtroom. This wasn't the harsh sentence many had expected. Therefore, Judge Washington announced, I am sentencing you as follows. First, a fine of $5,000 to be paid to the school safety fund. Second, suspension of your driver's license for a period of 3 months. And third, he paused and the courtroom fell silent in anticipation. 200 hours of community service to be served at the West Side Youth Center, located in the very neighborhood where you were speeding. The center serves children from low-income families, providing after-school programs, tutoring, and meals. Veronica blinked in surprise. Community service? In that neighborhood? She'd never even been to that part of town except to drive through it. Your service will begin next Monday at 8 a.m. and continue for 10 hours each week until your hours are completed. You will report directly to the center's director, and you will receive no special treatment. If you fail to complete your service satisfactorily, you will serve 30 days in county jail. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, Veronica replied quietly, still trying to process the sentence. Ms. Harrington, Judge Washington added as she was about to sit down, I hope you understand that this sentence isn't meant as punishment, but as education. Perhaps by working with these children, you'll gain perspective on the potential consequences of your reckless actions. As the gavel came down, the courtroom erupted in whispers. Veronica stood frozen, trying to comprehend how her life had just changed so dramatically. Clayton leaned over. "You got lucky," he whispered. "Very lucky." But as Veronica looked back at the judge, she wasn't sure lucky was the right word. For the first time in her life, she was being held accountable, and she had no idea how to handle it. The weekend passed in a blur of panic and self-pity for Veronica. She'd canceled her plans for a spa getaway with friends, unable to face their questions about her court appearance. Instead, she'd locked herself in her luxury apartment, alternating between rage, disbelief, and dread about the community service that loomed ahead. By Sunday night, she'd left her father 17 voicemails, each more desperate than the last. He finally called back just before midnight. "Daddy, you have to do something," she pleaded. "Call Judge Washington or the mayor or whoever you need to. I can't work at some dirty youth center in the bad part of town." Richard Harrington's voice was unusually stern. "I've spoken with Clayton. The judge made it clear that any attempt to interfere with your sentence would result in jail time instead. For once in your life, Veronica, you're going to face the music. But Daddy, on no buts. I've been too soft on you. Maybe this is exactly what you need." His voice softened slightly. "Besides, it's just community service. Think of it as material for your Instagram. Helping the less fortunate looks good on your social profile." Veronica hadn't considered that angle. Maybe she could spin this into a charitable campaign, complete with perfectly filtered photos of her surrounded by grateful poor kids. The thought cheered her slightly. Her optimism evaporated. The next morning, when her rideshare dropped her off in front of the Westside Youth Center at 7:58 a.m., the building was an old converted warehouse, its brick facade covered in colorful murals of children playing. The surrounding neighborhood was nothing like the glossy downtown district where Veronica lived. Here, small businesses with security bars on their windows lined streets that had seen better days. Groups of people waited at bus stops heading to jobs across town. Veronica clutched her designer handbag closer to her body as she approached the center's entrance, stepping carefully in her impractical shoes. She'd dressed for the occasion in what she considered casual clothes, still designer labels, but jeans and a simple blouse rather than her usual cocktail dresses or boutique athleisure wear. The center's interior surprised her. Though clearly operating on a tight budget, the space was clean, bright, and welcoming. Colorful artwork covered the walls, along with photographs of smiling children engaged in various activities. Several classrooms branched off from a large central area filled with tables and chairs. "You must be Veronica Harrington." She turned to find a woman in her 40s studying her with undisguised curiosity. The woman had warm brown skin, curly hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and wore simple jeans with a t-shirt bearing the youth center's logo. No designer labels in sight, but she carried herself with unmistakable confidence. "I'm Diane Powell, the center director," she said, extending her hand. "Judge Washington called to let me know you'd be joining us." Veronica hesitated before shaking the offered hand. "I'm not really joining you. I'm just here because I have to be." Diane's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened slightly. "Well, whether you want to be here or not, we have work to do. And since you're taking up a volunteer slot, I expect you to actually be useful." "I'm not really the volunteer type," Veronica said with a nervous laugh. "I usually just write checks to charities at my father's fundraisers." "Well, your checkbook won't help you here," Diane replied, turning to lead the way down a hallway. "Judge Washington was specific about you working directly with our kids." They stopped at a supply closet, and Diane handed Veronica a broom. "We start each day with basic cleanup. The janitor handles the bathrooms and floors, but we need all surfaces wiped down, trash emptied, and supplies organized before the kids arrive at 3:30. Veronica stared at the broom as if she'd been handed an alien artifact. "You want me to sweep? I have a cleaning service for that." Diane didn't bother hiding her eye roll. "Yes, I want you to sweep. And then I want you to wipe down tables, sharpen pencils, sort art supplies, and help prepare snacks. Consider it your orientation day." The next few hours were a revelation for Veronica. She'd never done such menial tasks in her life, and her lack of experience showed. She sloshed mop water onto her expensive shoes, pricked her finger while hanging children's artwork, and nearly sliced her thumb off trying to use the ancient pencil sharpener. "Haven't you ever sharpened a pencil before?" asked Luis, the center's middle-aged handyman, as he showed her how to hold it correctly. "Why would I?" Veronica replied without thinking. "That's what assistants are for." Luis gave her a long look but said nothing. simply demonstrating the proper technique again before moving on to fix a wobbly table. By lunchtime, Veronica's hands were sore, her back ached, and her perfect manicure was ruined. She collapsed into a chair in the staff break room, eyeing the sad brown bag lunch she'd hastily packed that morning, a limp salad and a protein bar. Diane entered with a steaming container of what smelled like homemade stew. The aroma made Veronica's sad lunch seem even more pathetic. "First day's always the hardest," Diane said, nodding at Veronica's slumped posture. "You'll build calluses." "I don't want calluses," Veronica muttered. "I get regular hand treatment specifically to prevent them." To her surprise, Diane laughed. "You really are from another world, aren't you?" She pushed half her stew container toward Veronica. "Here, you look like you need this more than I do." Veronica hesitated, then accepted the offering. "Thanks," she said, the word feeling strange on her lips. She wasn't used to expressing gratitude. "So what did you do to get on Washington's bad side?" Diane asked between bites. "He doesn't usually send us community service people unless they need a serious reality check." Veronica shifted uncomfortably. "I was speeding in a school zone, and then I might have been a little disrespectful in court." "A little? Okay, a lot disrespectful. I didn't think it was a big deal at the time." Diane nodded thoughtfully. "The judge's nephew was hit by a car in a school zone when he was 7. Driver was texting, going way too fast. The boy survived, but he walks with a limp to this day." Veronica's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. "I didn't know that. Most people don't. Washington doesn't talk about it much, but it's why he's so tough on reckless driving cases." Diane checked her watch. "Break's over. We need to set up the homework stations before the kids arrive." The afternoon brought a new kind of chaos as children began pouring into the center after school. They ranged in age from about 6 to 16, all wearing the same simple uniform from the local public school. They were loud, energetic, and completely overwhelming to Veronica, who had limited experience with children. Diane assigned her to the art corner, where she was supposed to help younger kids with a painting project. Veronica stood awkwardly as small bodies swarmed around her, grabbing supplies and chattering excitedly. "Are you new?" asked a tiny girl with beaded braids and bright eyes. "You look like a movie star." Veronica couldn't help but smile at the compliment. "I'm just helping out for a while. Can you help me mix purple?" the girl asked, holding up 2 paint bottles. "It's for my unicorn, but I can never get it right." Sure." Veronica took the red and blue paints, carefully showing the child how to blend them. "See? Just a little bit at a time until you get the color you want." "That's perfect." The girl beamed up at her. "I'm Lily. What's your name?" "Veronica. That's a pretty name. Want to see my unicorn when I finish painting it?" Before she could answer, a boy at the next table knocked over a cup of water, sending it cascading onto his paper and the floor. He looked up in horror, clearly expecting to be scolded. "It's okay," Veronica found herself saying as she grabbed paper towels. "Accidents happen." She helped him mop up the spill and salvage his artwork. "Look, the water made an interesting effect on your drawing. Sometimes mistakes turn into something cool." The boy's face brightened. "Yeah, it looks like a storm now." "That's even better." For the next 2 hours, Veronica moved from table to table, helping with art projects, answering questions, and breaking up the occasional argument over supplies. To her surprise, she found herself enjoying the children's energy and creativity. They were nothing like she'd expected. Not dirty or dangerous or sad. Just normal kids who happened to live in a less affluent neighborhood. As the center began to empty, parents arriving to pick up their children, Diane approached Veronica. "Not bad for your first day," she said. "The kids seem to like you." Veronica shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant despite the strange sense of accomplishment she felt. "They're easier to deal with than I expected." "They're just kids," Diane replied simply. "No different from any others, except maybe they have fewer advantages." She handed Veronica a schedule. "Here's when we need you this week. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, all day Saturday. Judge Washington said 10 hours a week minimum." Veronica stared at the paper. "Saturday, there went her weekend brunches and shopping trips. I expect you to be on time," Diane continued. "These kids have enough people disappointing them. They don't need another flaky adult in their lives." The comment stung more than Veronica wanted to admit. "I'll be here," she said quietly, as she waited outside for her rideshare. Exhausted from a day of actual work, Veronica noticed Lily standing alone at the curb. occasionally peeking down the street. Is someone coming to get you? Veronica asked, approaching the child. Lily nodded. My mom. She works at the hospital, so sometimes she's late. It's okay, though. Ms. Diane waits with me if it gets dark. Veronica checked her watch. It was already past 6 p.m. Do you wait by yourself like this a lot? Just sometimes. Mom works really hard to take care of me and my brother since Dad left. She's the best mom ever, even if she can't pick me up right on time. Something uncomfortable twisted in Veronica's chest. This little girl, waiting patiently for her overworked mother, showed more maturity and understanding than Veronica had ever needed to. A tired-looking woman in scrubs hurried up the sidewalk. Lily, I'm so sorry, baby. The bus was late again. It's okay, Mommy. I was talking to Ms. Veronica. She helped me paint a purple unicorn today. The woman smiled gratefully at Veronica. Thank you for keeping an eye on her. Are you new at the center? Just started today, Veronica replied, suddenly embarrassed to explain why she was really there. Well, we appreciate all you volunteers. This place is a lifesaver for working parents like me. She took Lily's hand. See you next time. As they walked away, Lily turned to wave enthusiastically at Veronica, who found herself waving back. Her phone buzzed with a text from one of her friends. Drinks tonight at Skyline? Eduardo got us on the VIP list. Veronica stared at the message for a long moment, then typed her reply. Can't tonight. Exhausted from work. Work. The word felt strange as she typed it, but somehow, for the first time in her life, it also felt right. Weeks passed and a routine emerged. Veronica found herself automatically waking up early on her community service days. No longer needing the 3 alarms she'd initially set, the youth center had become a fixture in her life, one she approached with less and less dread as time went on. On this particular Thursday afternoon, Veronica arrived with a large tote bag slung over her shoulder, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her designer clothes had gradually been replaced by more practical attire, jeans that could withstand paint splatters and comfortable shoes that didn't pinch after hours of standing. You're early, Diane noted as Veronica stashed her bag in the staff room. Traffic was light, Veronica replied with a shrug, though they both knew it was more than that. She'd started coming in before her scheduled hours, finding a strange satisfaction in the work that had once seemed so beneath her. Well, since you're here, want to help me sort through these donation boxes? Someone dropped off a bunch of art supplies, but they need organizing. Veronica nodded, following Diane to a stack of cardboard boxes in the supply room. As they began unpacking crayons, markers, and construction paper, Diane gave her a sidelong glance. You've changed, she observed. Veronica looked up, surprised. What do you mean? When you first showed up, I figured you'd be counting the minutes until your sentence was over. But it's been, 6 weeks? And you're actually putting in effort. The kids have noticed, too. Warmth bloomed in Veronica's chest at the unexpected praise. They're good kids, she said simply. Most are, Diane agreed. Though I'm worried about Angelo. Have you noticed he hasn't been doing his homework lately? Angelo was a quiet 12-year-old who usually kept to himself, preferring books to the more rowdy activities. Veronica had noticed him struggling to concentrate recently, but hadn't thought much of it. Is something wrong at home? Diane sighed. His mom's working double shifts now that his dad lost his construction job. There's no one to help him with school stuff, and I think he's falling behind. Veronica finished organizing a box of colored pencils and idea forming. I was pretty good at math in school. Maybe I could help him? The surprise on Diane's face stung a little, but Veronica couldn't blame her. 6 weeks ago, she wouldn't have volunteered for anything that didn't directly benefit her. That would be great, actually, Diane said. He could use some one-on-one attention. That afternoon, Veronica approached Angelo's table during homework time. He was staring at a math worksheet, his pencil tapping anxiously against the paper. Need some help? She asked, pulling up a chair beside him. He looked up with wary eyes. It's dumb. I used to be good at math. Mind if I take a look? She glanced at the worksheet, fractions and decimals. Not particularly complex, but frustrating if you didn't understand the concept. I used to struggle with these too. You did? He seemed skeptical. Absolutely. My tutor made me practice for hours. She didn't mention that the tutor had cost more per hour than most people made in a day. Want me to show you a trick? For the next 30 minutes, Veronica patiently walked Angelo through the problems, breaking them down into simple steps. His face lit up when he successfully solved a particularly tricky question. "You're actually a pretty good teacher, Ms. Veronica," he said with surprise. "Don't sound so shocked," she laughed. "I have hidden talents. Can you help me again tomorrow? We have a test on Monday and I'm really scared I'll fail." Veronica hesitated. Tomorrow wasn't one of her scheduled days, and she had plans to meet friends for lunch at an exclusive new restaurant that had a month-long waiting list. "I'll be here," she heard herself say. "Bring your notes and we'll go through everything." Later, as the center was closing up, Lily bounded over to Veronica, clutching a piece of paper. "Ms. Veronica, I made this for you." She thrust the paper forward proudly. It was a drawing of two figures holding hands, one small with beaded braids, the other tall with long blonde hair. Both had enormous smiles surrounded by hearts and stars. "That's you and me," Lily explained unnecessarily. "Because you're my friend." Veronica carefully took the drawing, something catching in her throat. "It's beautiful, Lily, thank you. Will you put it on your refrigerator?" "My mom puts my drawings on our refrigerator." "I absolutely will," Veronica promised, and she meant it. On her rideshare home, Veronica stared at the drawing, thinking about the children she'd come to know over the past weeks. Angelo with his quiet intelligence, Lily with her boundless enthusiasm. The twins who bickered constantly but defended each other fiercely against anyone else. The teenage girls who had initially mocked her designer clothes but now asked her advice about school problems and crushes. They weren't just poor kids anymore, a faceless, abstract concept. They were individuals with dreams, fears, and potential. And somehow, without realizing it, Veronica had come to care about what happened to them. Her phone buzzed with a text from her friend Tiffany. "Where have you been hiding?" "We haven't seen you in forever." Veronica hesitated before replying. "Been busy with a project." "Have to cancel lunch tomorrow. Something important came up." The response was immediate. "More important than Bistro Laurent?" "They've got actual celebrities on the wait list." A few weeks ago, nothing would have seemed more important than being seen at the hottest new restaurant. Now Veronica found herself typing, "Yeah, actually, it is." She put her phone away before Tiffany could respond, feeling a strange mix of emotions she couldn't quite name. The next day, Veronica arrived at the center carrying two large bags. One contained a collection of math workbooks she'd bought that morning, along with colorful sticky notes and highlighters for Angelo. The other held a set of high-quality art supplies for the center, not donated cast-offs but brand-new materials she'd purchased herself. "What's all this?" Diane asked, eyebrows raised. "Just some things I thought might be useful." Veronica tried to sound casual, but couldn't hide her smile when she saw Diane's pleased expression. The afternoon was spent helping Angelo prepare for his test. His confidence grew with each problem he solved correctly, and by the end of their session, he was explaining the concepts back to Veronica with perfect understanding. "You're going to ace that test," she told him. "Just remember the steps we practiced." "Thanks, Ms. Veronica." He looked down shyly. "Nobody ever had time to help me like this before." Later, as Veronica was cleaning up the art corner, she overheard Diane on the phone in her office, her voice tense with worry. "I understand the budget cuts are citywide, but we're already operating on a shoestring. Yes, I know everyone has to make sacrifices, but these kids have nowhere else to go after school." 3 months? That's not enough time to find alternative funding." Veronica paused, paint-covered paper towels in hand, listening to the one-sided conversation that was clearly about bad news. When Diane emerged from her office, her usual confident demeanor had faltered. She looked tired and defeated. "Everything okay?" Veronica asked, though it clearly wasn't. Diane ran a hand over her face. "City's cutting our funding by 30%. They're redirecting resources to a new development project downtown." "But what about the center?" "We'll manage for a few months on reserves. After that?" Diane shrugged, the gesture heavy with resignation. "We might have to reduce hours, cut some programs. Worst case, we close completely." "They can't do that." Veronica felt a surge of unexpected anger. "Where will the kids go?" "Some will go home to empty apartments because their parents work. Some will hang out on the streets. The older ones might find trouble." Diane sighed. "This happens every few years. We fight, we scrape by, we lose a little more each time." The injustice of it hit Veronica like a physical blow. These children who had so little to begin with We're going to lose one of the few safe spaces in their lives because of budget cuts. Meanwhile, her father was probably spending more on a single business dinner tonight than the center needed to stay afloat. There has to be something we can do, Veronica said, her mind already racing. Unless you've got a spare $100,000, there's not much to be done. Diane attempted a smile. Don't worry, we'll figure something out. We always do. But as Veronica watched the children playing and studying around her, blissfully unaware that their sanctuary was in jeopardy, a plan began to form in her mind. For the first time in her life, she had something she actually cared about saving. That evening, instead of going home, Veronica directed her rideshare to her father's office downtown. The gleaming skyscraper that housed Harrington Real Estate Development stretched toward the sky, its windows glittering in the setting sun. She'd rarely visited her father at work, preferring to meet him at restaurants or call when she needed money. The security guard recognized her immediately. "Ms. Harrington, it's been a while. Is my father still here?" she asked, checking her watch. It was after 7 p.m. in his office. "Shall I tell him you're coming up?" "No," Veronica replied with a smile. "I want to surprise him." The elevator whisked her to the top floor where her father's corner office overlooked the city. Through the glass walls, she could see him hunched over documents, his tie loosened, looking every bit the powerful businessman he was. She knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Dad?" Richard Harrington looked up in surprise. "Veronica? This is unexpected." He glanced at her paint-stained jeans and casual shirt. "Coming from your community service?" She nodded, taking a seat across from him. "I need to talk to you about something important." He leaned back in his chair, curiosity evident on his face. It wasn't like his daughter to seek him out, especially not for a serious conversation. Usually her calls and visits involved requests for money or complaints about trivial problems. "I'm listening," he said. Veronica took a deep breath. "It's about the West Side Youth Center. They're losing their funding because of city budget cuts and they might have to close." Richard frowned slightly. "That's unfortunate, but what does it have to do with me?" "The budget cuts are happening because money is being redirected to the downtown development project." "Your project, Dad?" Her father's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. The Riverside Plaza development." "Yes, the city is investing in infrastructure improvements to support it." He studied his daughter. "I'm sorry about the youth center, but that's how progress works. Some programs get cut so others can move forward." "These aren't just programs, Dad, they're children. Real kids who need a safe place to go after school." Veronica leaned forward, her voice passionate in a way her father had never heard before. "And they're going to lose that because the city thinks luxury condos and boutique shops are more important." Richard regarded his daughter with growing curiosity. "You seem genuinely upset about this." "I am. These kids deserve better." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos she'd taken at the center. Children painting, studying, playing. "This is Angelo. He's brilliant at math when someone takes the time to help him. This is Lily, who wants to be an artist. These twins lost their father last year and their mom works 2 jobs to support them." Her father watched as she spoke about each child with knowledge and affection. This was not the self-absorbed daughter he was accustomed to. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Veronica?" She met his gaze directly. "I want you to help save the center. You have connections, influence. The Harrington Foundation could provide funding, or you could speak to the city council about reconsidering the budget cuts." Richard leaned back, steepling his fingers. "That's a significant request. Why should I get involved?" Veronica paused, considering her words carefully. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because," she took a deep breath, "because for the first time in my life I care about something that isn't just about me. And I'm asking for your help. Not for a new car or a trip to Europe, but for something that actually matters." For a long moment, Richard studied his daughter, seeing something new in her eyes. Purpose, conviction. The community service sentence that he'd initially seen as an inconvenience had somehow changed her. "Tell me more about this youth center," he said finally, reaching for a notepad. "And start from the beginning." 3 months had passed since Veronica's conversation with her father. The morning air was crisp as she pulled up to the West Side Youth Center in her own car. Her license suspension had ended, though she now drove a sensible mid-range sedan rather than her flashy convertible. She'd sold the convertible and donated half the money to the center, a decision that would have been unthinkable just a few months earlier. Today was a big day. Veronica checked her appearance in the rearview mirror, not out of vanity as she once would have, but to make sure she looked presentable. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, her makeup minimal. The designer clothes that had once been her armor were now reserved for special occasions. Today, she wore a simple blouse and slacks that wouldn't restrict her movement as she helped prepare for the event. As she entered the building, she was greeted by controlled chaos. Volunteers moved purposefully through the space, hanging decorations and arranging chairs. The center looked almost unrecognizable. The walls had been freshly painted. New equipment filled the rooms, and large windows had replaced the small, dingy ones that had barely let in light. "There you are," Diane called, waving her over. "We need your help with the presentation setup." Veronica hurried to join her, navigating around a group of children who were creating welcome signs with painstaking care. Lily spotted her and broke away from the group, running to give her a quick hug before returning to her artistic duties. "Nervous?" Diane asked as they worked together to arrange a display of before and after photos showing the center's transformation. "A little," Veronica admitted. "There will be a lot of people watching. You'll do fine. Just speak from the heart like you did when you convinced your father to help." The memory of that conversation still amazed Veronica. She'd gone to her father's office expecting to beg for a donation, maybe enough to keep the center open another year. Instead, what had started as a simple request had evolved into something much bigger. Richard Harrington had listened to his daughter with growing interest as she passionately advocated for the youth center. He'd asked pointed questions about the programs, the children, the neighborhood. And then, instead of writing a check, he'd made a phone call to the mayor. What followed had been weeks of meetings, proposals, and negotiations. The Harrington Foundation had established a community development initiative, with the youth center as its flagship project. But the foundation money came with conditions. The city had to match certain funds. Local businesses had to contribute, and the community had to be involved in decisions. To everyone's surprise, Veronica had thrown herself into the work, attending every meeting, researching grant opportunities, and rallying support from unlikely allies. She'd even convinced some of her wealthy friends to donate, hosting a fundraiser at her apartment where the children's artwork was displayed and sold for impressive sums. Today was the grand reopening, celebrating not just the center's physical renovation, but its new status as a permanent fixture in the community, with stable funding for years to come. "Ms. Veronica," Angelo called, hurrying over with a tablet in his hand. "I finished the slideshow for the presentation. Want to see?" She smiled at the boy who had once been too shy to speak to her. In the past months, she'd continued tutoring him in math, and his grades had improved dramatically. He'd discovered a talent for technology as well, eagerly learning to use the new computers the center had acquired. "It looks perfect," she said after reviewing his work. "You've got a real eye for design." He beamed at the praise. "My mom's coming today. She got time off from both jobs to be here. I can't wait to meet her." As Angelo returned to his task, Veronica felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find her father standing behind her, looking somewhat out of place in his expensive suit among the casual volunteers. "The press is starting to arrive," he said. "Are you ready?" Veronica nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." Richard studied his daughter with undisguised pride. "You know, when Judge Washington sentenced you to community service, I thought it was just a slap on the wrist. I never expected—" He gestured around at the bustling center. "You never expected me to actually care about something beyond myself?" Veronica finished with a wry smile. "That's not fair," he protested, but there was no heat in his words. "I just never gave you the chance to care about something real." "That's on me." Before Veronica could respond, the center's doors opened and people began to file in. Parents, community members, city officials, and members of the press. Among them was a familiar figure in judicial robes. "Judge Washington," Veronica breathed, suddenly nervous. Her community service hours had been completed weeks ago, but she'd continued volunteering at the center. She hadn't seen the judge since her last required check-in. Her father squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "I invited him. Thought he should see the results of his sentence." As the crowd settled into chairs, Diane stepped up to the podium that had been set up at one end of the main room. She welcomed everyone and briefly outlined the center's history and the recent changes before introducing Veronica. Taking a deep breath, Veronica approached the podium. The faces before her represented a cross-section of the city, Wealthy donors in expensive clothes, working parents in uniforms or scrubs, children fidgeting in their seats, officials with polite smiles. And front and center, Judge Washington, his expression unreadable. 6 months ago, she began, I stood in a courtroom, angry about having to do community service for a mistake I didn't think was a big deal. I was disrespectful to the court and to Judge Washington. She paused, meeting the judge's eyes directly. I was wrong. Not just about my reckless driving, which could have hurt someone, but about so many things. She gestured to the children seated together, watching her with bright eyes. These kids taught me what really matters. They showed me that true privilege isn't about money or status or getting your way. It's about having opportunities, support, and people who believe in you. As she continued her speech, Veronica detailed the center's new programs: expanded hours, weekend activities, a computer lab, a college preparation program for teens, and support services for parents. She thanked the donors, the city officials who had approved matching funds, and the community members who had volunteered their time and skills for the renovation. But this isn't charity, she emphasized. It's investment in our children, in our community, and in our shared future. Every child deserves a safe place to learn and grow, regardless of their zip code or their parents' bank account. When she finished speaking, the applause was warm and genuine. As people mingled afterward, enjoying refreshments and touring the renovated facility, Veronica found herself face to face with Judge Washington. Your Honor, she said, suddenly feeling like that nervous girl in the courtroom again. Thank you for coming. I wouldn't have missed it, he replied. You've done remarkable work here, Ms. Harrington. I had a good teacher, she said with a small smile. Your sentence changed my life. The judge nodded thoughtfully. That was the intention. Justice isn't just about punishment, it's about restoration and growth. He glanced around at the center, at the children proudly showing visitors their artwork and projects. I admit I didn't expect quite this level of transformation. Neither did I, Veronica admitted. But once I actually started seeing the kids as real people with dreams and potential, I couldn't just walk away when my hours were done. That's the difference between service as punishment and service as purpose, the judge said. You found your purpose. Before Veronica could respond, Lily came running up, tugging on her hand. Ms. Veronica, come quick. The news people want to talk to me about my art. Excusing herself with a smile, Veronica followed Lily to where a local reporter was interviewing children about the center. As she watched the little girl proudly explain her painting, she felt a deep contentment that no shopping spree or exclusive party had ever provided. Later, as the event wound down, Veronica found herself alone with Diane in the quiet of the director's newly renovated office. So, Diane said, dropping into her chair with a tired but happy sigh, your official community service ended months ago. What now, back to your real life? Veronica looked out the window at the playground where children were still playing, supervised by volunteers. This is my real life now, she said softly. At least part of it. I'm starting classes next month, social work and nonprofit management. Diane's eyebrows shot up. Seriously? What happened to the trust fund party girl? She grew up, Veronica said with a shrug. Turns out helping others is a lot more satisfying than just helping myself. Who knew? I think Judge Washington knew, Diane replied with a knowing smile. That man's been sending us community service kids for years. Most do their hours and disappear, but every once in a while, one sticks around. Something tells me he saw potential in you from the beginning. Veronica thought back to that day in court, to her disrespect and the judge's measured response. He could have thrown her in jail for contempt, but instead, he'd given her the one thing her privileged life had never provided: perspective. As she gathered her things to leave, Veronica paused by the wall where children's artwork was displayed. Among the colorful drawings was Lily's picture of the two of them holding hands, now professionally framed. Beside it hung a new edition, a newspaper clipping with the headline, Local Heiress Leads Youth Center Revitalization. The photo showed Veronica surrounded by smiling children, looking nothing like the entitled young woman who had sauntered into court 6 months earlier. Outside, the evening was settling in, golden light washing over the neighborhood that had once seemed so foreign and frightening to her. Veronica recognized several residents now. The older man who ran the corner store and always gave the kids free candy on Fridays. The woman who taught dance classes at the community college and had volunteered to start a program at the center, the bus driver who knew every child by name. This community, which she had once driven through without a second glance, had become part of her world. These people, whom she would once have dismissed as irrelevant to her privileged existence, had taught her more about life and resilience than any exclusive school or luxury vacation ever could. As she walked to her car, Veronica spotted Judge Washington leaving the center. On impulse, she called out to him, "Your Honor, I never properly thanked you." He turned, waiting as she approached. "Your sentence could have been just a punishment," she said, "but instead it was a gift. Thank you for seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself." Judge Washington smiled, a warm, genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. "That's the best kind of justice, Ms. Harrington. The kind that changes lives rather than just penalizing mistakes." He nodded toward the center behind them. "What you've done here will outlast any sentence I could have given you. Remember that on the difficult days ahead, because there will be difficult days." "I know," she said. "But there will be good ones too, days like today." As the judge walked away, Veronica looked back at the youth center one last time. Through the windows, she could see children and adults working together to clean up after the event, laughing and talking. 6 months ago, she would have considered this community beneath her. Now she understood that she had been the one with something to learn. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Proud of you today. Dinner tomorrow to discuss the Foundation's next project?" Veronica smiled as she typed her reply. "Absolutely. I have some ideas about that vacant lot near the high school." The journey that had begun with disrespect in a courtroom had led her to a purpose she never knew she needed. And as she drove away from the center, not leaving it behind, but carrying its lessons with her, Veronica felt something she'd rarely experienced in her privileged life: the quiet satisfaction of having made a genuine difference.